Hello everyone, welcome to History Civics class of class 10, chapter number 4, The Rise of Assertive or Radical Nationalism. The assertive nationalism was the second phase of the Indian national movement which began in 1905 and ended in 1916. So in this lesson we are going to learn about radical nationalism, why there was a need of radical nationalism, and what caused the rise of assertive nationalism and what were their principles and objectives. So, the radical nationalism. During the period from 1885 to 1905, the Congress depended on constitutional means they followed the three P's. The three P's means prayer, petition and protest to get their demands accepted. But they also believed in British sense of justice and fair play. But the government always discarded their appeal and nothing good came out of it. None of their appeals were accepted. So, the young leaders of the Congress like Lal Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal, who are together very famously known as the trio of Lal Bal Pal. They are very famous for their trio, and they realized the futility of the constitutional means the pointlessness or uselessness of the constitutional means, and they believed more in assertive radical form of nationalism. They believed that they have to drive the Britishers out of India with violent method. The early nationalists were moderates. Their demands were moderates, their methods were moderates, their principles and objectives were moderates. But here, they were opposite. The trio was opposite of the moderate. They were far from the moderates. These people were violent, these people were extremist and revolutionarist. And also, they wanted to achieve Swaraj with radical means violent means, and they also believed in continuous struggle. Not like they will ask for something, the Britishers will deny it and the chapter closes there. No, not like that. No, that's wrong. But here they wanted to achieve Swaraj with the continuous struggle. They will struggle, they will die for Swaraj, or they will do whatever it takes. Then, with the domination and guidance of the trio, the national movement from 1905 to 1916 began. So, this is called the second phase of the Indian national movement, the rise of the assertive or radical nationalism. And these three leaders constituted the trio that led the national movement. These three people were the reason for the national movement in the early years of the 20th century. So this period is called as the period of assertive or radical nationalism. Next one, why assertive or radical nationalism? Why there was a need of it when early nationalists were already there? The reason was the dissatisfaction with the early nationalist. The dissatisfaction, why there was dissatisfaction with the early nationalist? Because the early nationalists were not able to bring Swaraj. They followed the policy of prayer, petition, and so the petition, the deputation which were sent to England and all were always discarded. They were always ignored. So the dissatisfaction that was created by the early nationalists gave a rise for the radical nationalism. Then, aggressive or radical nationalists stood for complete Swaraj. As we know, the early nationalists wanted only Swaraj, but the radical nationalists wanted complete Swaraj. Swaraj means self government, but complete Swaraj means complete independence. The next one included the masses. The reason for the failure of early nationalists was they were not able to reach maximum people. But here, these people included the masses like peasants, workers, and the youth. Why? Because peasants, workers, and youth were the one who were betrayed the most by the Britishers. Peasants were ill-treated by the zamindars with the help of Britishers. Workers were unemployed because of machinery goods. And youth were unemployed because they got education but no job. So they try to connect with these masses to enlarge the national movement. Then a field to the masses, a field to their method of boycott. Now they requested the masses to boycott the foreign goods and start using the Swadeshi goods. That's why radical nationalism aroused. Next one. What were the causes, the exact causes for the rise of assertive or radical nationalism? First one, we have already learned the failure of the early nationalist. Constitutional methods of early nationalist. The early nationalists adopted constitutional methods to achieve their aims. They raised their voices through public meetings and submitted petitions and resolutions to the Englishmen. But their methods failed very badly. The British turned a deaf ear to their resolution and petition, their demands. The British did not care about the welfare of the Indians, which led to the rise of assertive radical nationalists. Later on, who resolved to give a cutting edge to their movement. The radicals wanted to give a cut to their movement, to the early nationalists. They believed that freedom had to be fought for. Nobody will serve you. Nobody will serve you freedom in your plate, my dears. So the radicals believed that, freedom is something that you need to fight for. So as the Englishmen would never change the tendency of imperialistic means, they will never stop expanding their colonies. They will keep on ruling us. They will keep on. It doesn't matter how many petitions we drop, how many memorandums we send, how many deputations we send. Doesn't matter. They are going to continue with their imperialistic tendency. This was clearly known by the radicals. They were aware of this. Okay, and their only means left was to be ever ready for making greater sacrifices. Freedom will be given, they will get the freedom only when they will sacrifice. So as a result, the Indians were forced to opt for the agitational way. They wanted to go against, they followed the agitational ways. Next one, the true nature of the British rule. When it comes to the true nature, it all leads to economic exploitation, the exploitation of Indian resources, the unemployment of the educated Indians, expenditure on their army from Indian economy. All this lead to what? The real face of the British rule actually. The constant economic drain on the resources of the country due to foreign rule added to the hatred in the country. The assertive nationalists exposed the true nature of the British rule, which had been eating into the very structure of Indian economy. They were looting our Indian economy to their country. Then Balagangadhara Tilak presented the true picture of the British rule through his writings in his newspaper like Kesari and Maratha. And he exposed the so-called doctrines of the early nationalists. The early nationalists made the people believe that Indians could progress under the guidance and control of the Britishers. And they did not try to emphasize or expose the exploitation of Indian resources. And their policy of exploiting the resources of India to run the British industries proved harmful for the industries in India. So the policy of free trade also hit the Indians' trade and industries very badly. Now, the economic policy, the British rule economic policy led to the Indians' poverty and unemployment. And in that case, a number of Indians, educated Indians, remained unemployed. By the close of 19th century, the number of the educated Indian increased, and most of them were unemployed. And not only that, if they were employed also, they were not employed for the high post. They were, when it comes to the administration, only till clerk. When it comes to military, only till subedars, not more than that. This created a feeling of frustration which fed the fire of assertive or radical nationalism. Not only that, they used to spend, the expenditure spent on British army was from Indian economy. It was from Indian economy. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Britishers were fighting wars with Tibet, Afghanistan, Africa, which really put great pressure on, poor resources of India, because they have already exploited the resources of India, and now they are draining the Indian resources to fight against Tibet, Afghanistan, and Africa. The Indians now began to believe that their bad time or miseries could come to end only when the Britishers are driven out. So this way, Balagangadhara Tilak, in his newspapers, Kesari and Maratha, he exposed the exploitation of Indian resources, economic drain, free trade theory, all this in his newspaper. Actually, it is very, very important. Kesari and Maratha, remember children, which were the two newspaper found by Bal Gangadhara Tilak. Then it is Kesari and Maratha. Next one, famines and plague and the continued apathy of the government. During the opening of, in 1851, at the end, it's kind of between 1851 to 1900, the people of various part of India, especially in the South India, suffered several droughts and famines. Drought means no water, and all famines means no food and water. The people suffered many hardships, while the government did not take appropriate measures to help them. Instead, the ignorance by the government during the time of the drought and famine, okay, they did not take any proper measures, but on the other hand, they wasted a huge amount of money on the Silver Jubilee celebration of Queen Victoria's accession. During this time, it has been 25 years of, after attaining the power, Queen Victoria attaining the power over India. It was the 25th anniversary. So they spent huge amount on Silver Jubilee celebration of Queen Victoria's power rather than looking into the droughts and famines. And not only that, when plague raged in Pune, the government's indifferences and apathy added to anger and disgust of the common people. So apathy means carelessness. Okay, apathy means carelessness, or no concern was shown towards the plague in Pune, and they were celebrating, and that at this time they were celebrating Queen Victoria's power over India. And Tilak attacked the policy of government in Kesari. Again, Tilak criticized this celebration in his newspaper Kesari and Maratha very badly, very aggressively. For that, he was sentenced, or he was imprisoned. He was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. Okay, he was given the punishment of 18 months of imprisonments. Then next one, and when Bal Gangadhara Tilak was imprisoned, it sent a wave of hatred throughout India. The famines and the plague, the unjust and repressive policy of the British, and finally the imprisonment of Tilak collectively, all together, contributed for the rise of assertive radical nationalism. Next one, the reactionary policy of Lord Curzon. Lord Curzon was, he was a famous bureaucrat, par excellence. He was excellent in his job. He was officer of civil service, and he put great emphasis on efficiency. Okay, means organization. He wanted consistency in his work. He was an imperialist and reactionary and deadly opposed to Indian nationalism. He was completely opposite. He was against the nationalism. He was imperialist, means who believe in expanding their colonies by hook or by crook. They wanted their colonies to be expanded all over the country, the whole country under their hands. So he deadly opposed the Indian nationalism, and he had no sympathy with the hopes of the people of India. The people of India were hoping for Swaraj, and he did not have any sympathy for these people. He was not in favor of giving freedom to India, okay, because he believed that the English were, they were supposed to rule over India. They were destined to rule over India. So he passed the Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899, where the number of officials in the parliament will increase. Okay, the officials of British member will increase. The next one, he also passed the Indian University Act in 1904. By the Indian University Act of 1904, he imposed strict official control over the Indian university, educational centers, education systems, because he considered these universities or educational centers as the center of nationalism. He thought that the youth are prepared against the Britishers. So he took over the universities to make sure that no youth is, ignited against the Britishers. So he took over the universities. Again in 1904, he passed one more act, that is Official Secret Act. So according to this act, even the leakage of ordinary information regarding civil administration was considered illegal. According to this act, even the leakage of ordinary information, a smallest information, even about civil administration, will considered as illegal. That person will be punished whoever leaked the information. So all these measures provoked the people and added to the power and prestige of assertive nationalists. They could not stand all these acts against the Indian. So the trio completely went against the Britishers and criticized it. Next one, ill treatment of Indians in Africa. The Indians were there in Africa, the soldiers, as we know the Enlistment Act, according to the Enlistment Act, whoever will work in British Army, Indian British Army, they will have to sign the Enlistment Act, according to which wherever the British ask you to fight, you have to go there. So in that way, the Indian army was taken to Africa, as they were at the end of 20th century, 90th century. There were many wars in Tibet, Afghanistan, Africa, etc. So in that, the ill treatment of the Indians in Africa, the Indians had rendered useful service to the Britishers. And in the development of their colonies in Africa, the Britishers used to take Indian officers to take care of their administration in Africa. So they had a big hand in establishing a good colonies in Africa. But they were humiliated, they were disrespected, ill-treated, abused and insulted by the Britishers. Various restrictions were imposed on Indian soldiers. They were not allowed to walk on the footpath. They were not allowed to travel in the first class coach. Only the Britishers were allowed to travel in the first class coach, and they were not allowed to travel without permits. They have to take permission from the Britishers, and they cannot go out of their home after 9 o'clock at night, and they had no right to own or buy property. They could not enter the hotels which were meant for the Europeans. Means the hotels which are like standardized for the Europeans, the Indians cannot have any rest there. They were forced to pay various unjust taxes on salt, clothes, land revenue, etc. The Registration Act required them to get their names registered in government offices. So whoever is working in Africa, the African, they will have to register their name. The whole data has to be updated in the Britishers' register. They had to give their thumb impression and carry their identity card wherever they go. They have to have their identity card. So these were the ill treatment of the Indians in Africa. Next one, the repressive policy of the government. The repressive policy of the government. The Indian leaders were sent to jail for provoking the youth, provoking the masses, peasants, workers, everyone. In their bid to suppress the nationalistic sentiment, in their forceful way to stop this nationalism and to scare away the people, the English rulers followed the policy of repression. Means to stop nationalism, they followed many policies. They wanted to scare the people. Everyone was on the road against the Britishers, so they wanted to scare the people with all these repressive policies and all. Many of the Indian leaders were sent to jail and externed. Lal Lajpat Rai and Ajit Singh were transported to Mandalay in Burma. And Tilak criticized the repressive policy of the government in his newspaper like Kesari and Maratha, and he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. And next one, the Seditious Meeting Act. And as a part of the repressive policy, the government started Seditious Meetings Act, which means that if you want to, like, the people were not allowed to gather and have meeting about the nationalism. you know the act of this parliament of the British government, which made it illegal to hold meeting of more than 50 people, and these 50 people or less than 50 people cannot talk anything against the Britishers. So if more than 50 people gather and they talk against the Britishers, there were the chances that they end up having one more revolt. So they started this Seditious Act actually. And the English had thought that the sufferings of their leaders would make the people shudder and shiver, with fear. But it happened quite opposite to their expectation. When they came to know that their leaders were imprisoned, the people showed great enthusiasm to take part in the national struggle. And people were, also enraged when the government banned meetings and conferences under the Act of Seditious Meeting Act. So all this gave a way to the radical nationalist. So not only the internal part of India were leading to leading to assertive nationalist, there were international events as well. International events like Japan made great progress in industrial and military field, and they defeated Russia in 1904 to 1905 war. So Russia is it's a very powerful country, and Japan is a small country. So Japan defeating Russia was an inspiration for the Indians to drive out Britishers from India. And Italy was also defeated by Ethiopia, and Italy is larger compared to Ethiopia. So this also gave a motivation, encouragement to the Indians to drive the Britishers out. Now with all these small, even we remember that Afghanistan was able to defeat Britishers. So they felt that if European nations could be defeated, it was possible for the Indians to drive away the English from India. They were also inspired by the revolution, the myth of European security was now broken, that they told that if the Europeans can be defeated, we can also kick out these Britishers out of India. And not only that, Indians were inspired by the revolutions like Russia, France, Egypt, Ireland, Turkey, China, and etc. Okay, so these international events inspired this section of the nationalists to, multiply their struggle against the English. So effects of revolutionary principles of the West. So how the revolutionary principles of the West influence these early nationalists. The treatment given to the educated Indians by the Britisher rulers added to their bitterness. They were lowly, the educated Indians were lowly paid. They were not paid high, and not only that, many of them were unemployed. They were declared not fit for appointment to high post of responsibility. Unemployment. They were not given the job, stating that the Indians are not eligible, for high post of responsibility. But the spread of Western education inspired the educated Indians with the Western ideas of democracy, nationalism, liberty means freedom, democracy, government for the people, by the people, of the people, and nationalism, liberty, freedom, equality, and fraternity, brotherhood. All these ideas of these different countries gave a hope for the educated Indians to fight against the Britishers. They felt the foreign domination very strongly, the Western domination very strongly through, and very strongly, and realized that freedom can be achieved through revolutionary means and not through constitutional methods. They felt that self government was necessary for the political necessity of self government. Then felt that self government is necessary for political, economical and cultural development of the country. So they became very staunch enemies of the Britishers. Ninth one, partition of Bengal in 1905. The situation became highly explosive, highly intensified when Lord Curzon announced the partition of Bengal. The British declared that the aim of the partition was to introduce efficiency into the administration of a big province like Bengal. It means the Bengal is such a big province that the British government cannot handle it as one. So that has to be divided into two, East Bengal and West Bengal. But the reality was that they wanted to sow the seeds of communalism, Hindu and Muslim. West Bengal was given to Muslims, were supposed to be given to Muslims, and East Bengal was the mix of Hindu and Muslims. So with the Hindu majority. So they wanted to, sow the seeds of communalism, means Hindu divide and rule policy, Hindu and Muslim, and drive a wedge. Wedge means a gap between the Hindus and Muslims, and give a crushing blow to the national unity of India. I have told you many a times that with Bahadur Shah II and Nana Sahib had created an history when it comes to brotherhood, when it comes to unity of India. But now, with the help of divide and rule policy, the British were trying to put a wedge between the Hindus and Muslims. And so the rising tide of nationalism by they wanted to stop the rising tide of nationalism by adopting the policy of what? Divide and rule. So the partition hurt the national sentiments of the people and led to the widespread of what? Hatred, not only in Bengal but also in other part of the India. Next one, the contribution of Lal Lajpat Rai, Lokmanya Balagangadhara Tilak and what? Bipin Chandra Pal. So this trio, the contribution of this trio is remarkable. The trio, the enlightened leadership of Lal Bal Pal was the most important factor which contributed to the rise of assertive nationalism. They opposed the constitutional methods of early nationalists, and they advocated, supported agitation and vigorous political action to achieve Swaraj. They did not stay quiet. They wanted continuous struggle to achieve Swaraj. Vigorous means extreme, violent political action to achieve Swaraj. Then they opposed the constitutional methods of the early nationalists, and they supported this vigorous political action. They laid great emphasis on self-respect, self-reliance and self-sacrifice. Self-respect means to have a character, and to self-sacrifice means to give away, and self-reliance means they to do their own efforts to achieve something. So they taught the people to rely on their own efforts. And Balagangadhara Tilak once remarked that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. To quote him, protests are of no avail. Mere protest not backed by self-reliance will not help the people. Days of protest and prayers have gone. This is said by Balagangadhara Tilak. And he also wrote in his Kesari that if thieves enter our home and we have not sufficient strength to drive them out, we should without hesitation shut them up and burn them alive. Along with Lajpat Rai and Bipin Chandrapal, they advised the people to agitate against the Britishers. So, what were the principles or objectives of radical nationalists? The central principle or the main objective of assertive radical nationalist was that freedom is birthright of every Indian. Every Indian deserved to breathe in free India. They wanted to drive the English out of India and establish a government by the Indians, because they believed that Swaraj was the solution for all the problems of Indians. And they believed in the supremacy of Indian culture. And to protect the Indian culture, it was necessary to uproot the British rule from India. They held the English responsible for the downfall of Indian culture, and they had no faith in British sense of justice and fair play. They were not at all loyal to the British policy of political repression or economical exploitation. So they wanted to stop economic exploitation. And they supported Swadeshi goods against the use of imported or foreign goods. They wanted to encourage the Indian system of education. They had faith in constructive work, means action, and moral progress of the Indians. They had great faith in the strength of masses. That's why they called up peasants, workers, youth all together. They never believed in adopting constitutional means to achieve their aims. To achieve Swaraj, they wanted to follow the policy of passive resistance, vigorous political action, and continuous struggle until they achieve their goal. In the next video, we are going to learn about assertive nationalists and their achievements and methods of assertive nationalists, their achievements. What were the difference in the objectives and methods of early and assertive nationalists, and contribution of Lal Pal Pal. Thank you. Please kindly take down the notes.